A serial killer is more often than not seen by the public as an inhumane monster. Someone who decided to take the lives of other people is often very unlikable and unforgivable. But there are rare occasions when we can delve into the person's life and find out just what made them that way. One of the most infamous cases of a woman who was pushed around in life so much that she snapped was no other than Aileen Wuornos. And today, we're going to look at the events in her life that turned her into a monster. Rochester, Michigan. Diane Wuornos and Leo Dale Pittman married really young at 14 and 16 years old on June 3, 1954. By March 14, 1955, the couple had their first child, a boy they named Keith. Almost a year later, on February 29, 1956, Aileen Carol Pittman was born. And at that time, her birth father was already incarcerated. Aileen never met her father. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had been arrested for sex crimes involving children. He later hanged himself in prison, and good riddance. Less than 2 years after their marriage, Diane had filed for divorce anyway. So already, this family has made some just awful decisions. If you think the bad parenting stops there, you're wrong, because when Aileen was almost 4 years old, in 1960, Diane up and abandoned her children, leaving them in the legal care of their grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. This is when the story turns from sad to rather messed up. By the age of 11, Aileen had begun to exchange sexual favors at school for things like cigarettes, drugs, and food. Worse still, she and her brother were engaging in sexual acts. What did her grandparents do to help her? Absolutely nothing. Aileen claimed her alcoholic grandfather would make her strip down before beating and sexually harassing her. At the age of 14, Aileen became pregnant when an accomplice of her grandfather raped her. She gave up the baby boy to the Home for Unwed Mothers, March 23, 1971. She never had any involvement in the child's life. Now that's a lot to digest, but we can't stop to rest now, because the nightmare is just beginning. At age 15, Aileen and her grandfather had a domestic argument and he kicked her out, leaving her to fend for herself in the woods outside Troy, Michigan. She got by on prostitution and theft. At 18, she was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado for driving under the influence, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from the moving vehicle. She was later charged with failure to appear. By 20, Aileen wanted to escape her life and tried to do so by hitchhiking to Florida and getting involved with a 69-year-old yacht club president, Louis Gratz Fell. They quickly got married, which was printed in the local newspapers, and it finally seemed like in an awkward way Aileen was turning her life around. Except, she didn't. Putting a coat of paint on a tarnished life can only last so long. For Aileen continued to get into fights at the local bar and briefly went to jail for assault. She also hit Fell with his own cane, resulting in a restraining order only weeks after their marriage. On July 14, 1976, Aileen returned to Michigan, where she was promptly arrested for assault and disturbing the peace. This time, it was throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. 3 days later, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer, and his life insurance paid her $10,000. Later that month, Fell and Aileen annulled their short-lived marriage. August 1976, Aileen was charged $105 for drunk driving, which she paid with her inheritance, spending the rest of it on luxuries like a new car, which she crashed shortly after the purchase. When she was out of money, she returned to Florida, where she continued to steal and prostitute to support herself. She briefly did time in 1981 for an armed robbery, in which she stole $35 and some cigarettes. She was released in 1983, and by 1984, she was again arrested for attempting to pass forged checks at a bank in Key West. She did some more time in 1986, charged with car theft, resisting arrest, and obstruction of peace. Later that same year, police questioned Aileen when a customer of hers accused her of pulling a gun on him and demanding money. She was found carrying ammunition, and the gun in question was found under the passenger seat she occupied. In 1987, Aileen moved in with Tyra Moore, a hotel maid she'd met at a Daytona Beach lesbian bar. The relationship didn't seem to change her attitude towards life, though, because later that year, police detained the two of them for questioning when they were accused of battery with a beer bottle. Richard Charles Mallory was the breaking point in Aileen Wuornos' life that changed how she handled the torment life threw at her. Richard was a 51-year-old electronics store owner in Clearwater. He was a convicted rapist who had completed his time in jail in earlier years. On November 30th, 1989, Richard picked up Aileen and took her into the nearby woods to engage in sexual acts. According to her court testimony, Mallory attacked her after they parked, knocking her out and binding her hands while he sexually assaulted her. Somehow she wiggled free of her binds and shot Richard several times before hiding his body in a discarded chunk of carpet in the woods. This kill was significant, as it was the beginning of a spree that lasted a year. In May of 1990, Aileen killed 43-year-old David Spears by shooting him 6 times and stripped him naked. 5 days after the police found his body, they discovered 40-year-old Charles Clarskadon dead of 9 gunshots and ditched on the side of the road. His body was wrapped in an electric blanket and badly decomposed when discovered. Witnesses saw Aileen in possession of Charles's car and had pawned a gun identified as belonging to Charles. On July 30th, 1990, 65-year-old Peter Symes disappeared on the drive from Florida to Arkansas. Witnesses again saw 2 women in possession of his car, and later police found several of his things with Aileen's fingerprints on them at a pawn shop. On July 4th, his car was found abandoned with Aileen's palm print on the inside of the door. His body was never found. On July 31st, 1990, 50-year-old Troy Burris was reported missing. His body was discovered August 4th in a wooded area alongside Road 19 in Marion County. He had been shot twice. September 12th, 59-year-old former Chief of Police and Air Force Major Dick Murphys was found in Marion County. He'd been shot twice. Finally, on November 14th, Aileen Wuornos' last body was discovered. 62-year-old Walter Antonio was found nearly naked near a remote logging road in Dixie County. He'd been shot 4 times. 5 days later, his abandoned car was found. Police had a lead on the killer and her partner in crime from the fingerprints and eyewitness reports. On November 9, 1991, Aileen was arrested at the Last Resort Biker Bar. As a gift to the bar, she left her bra, which was held together by Band-Aids and hair ties. A day later, they contacted Tyra Moore and wanted her help to get a confession from Aileen in exchange for immunity. Held up in a hotel room rented by the police, Tyra called Aileen, pleading for help in clearing her name. 3 days later, Aileen confessed to the murder of 7 men. Aileen told conflicting stories about the murders. She said she'd either killed them in self-defense or in an attempt to rob the men, depending on who she was talking to. Her official stance was that Richard was the only one who had violently raped her. The others merely started to. By the end of her trials, she had received 6 death sentences. Even though Tyra was the reason for her confession, she claimed she never stopped loving her and that she was sorry that her actions had put her in harm's way. On October 9, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was put to death. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." Aileen's actions were not justified, but it's possible to see how she got so far gone. Life did nothing but abuse her since she was born, and in the end, no one was looking out for her. Her family abused her. She had no friends, and it seemed like everyone was out to get her. She wasn't living life. She was merely surviving it the only way she knew how. Maybe if Richard Mallory hadn't attacked her, she wouldn't have turned out this way, but I believe that it would have happened eventually. She sent to the court for the records the following letter. "I'm so sick of hearing this 'she's crazy' stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again. Aileen was a broken person who never knew how to do anything but be a criminal. I feel like if things had turned out differently for her, maybe she would have been a good person. A truly man-made monster. Thank you to High Life Official for the suggestion to cover this case. If you have any cases you'd like me to cover, send me an IM on Twitter or leave a comment below. Please consider subscribing for more true horror and movie reviews. Thank you so much. Everybody stay safe out there. Be well.